Hello everyone, my name is Brendan Doyle, and in this short video presentation I'm going to discuss the skeletal muscle adaptations to endurance training. Alright, so for the purpose of this video I'm going to keep it relatively short and simple, and I'm only going to discuss two main aspects of what happens to skeletal muscle after endurance exercise. So the first thing I'm going to start talking about is something called the mitochondria. Now, don't worry if you haven't heard this term before, I'll give you a quick explanation. And what the mitochondria is something called an organelle. And basically, it's responsible for producing energy for the body. So it produces energy. And what it's often referred to as, the powerhouse of the cell, or the body. Because basically what it does, it just produces a lot of energy. Now this energy comes in a molecule which is called ATP, which is short for adenosine triphosphate. But you don't really need to know that, just all you have to remember is that it produces energy called ATP. And basically this energy is the currency, so write this down, currency of biological energy. So in order to do something like kick a ball, we have to spend some sort of energy, or we spend ATP. So the more energy we use in activities, the more ATP we use, etc. It's that reciprocal relationship. So as I said at the beginning, the mitochondria up here make this energy molecule known as ATP, and it does so from the foods we eat. It breaks it down and helps it to produce more energy. So in response to endurance training, we get an increase in the number of mitochondria. So our numbers, increase of mitochondria. Now what this does is it has an overall increase in the capacity of cells or muscle cells to produce to produce ATP from the mitochondria. Don't get confused there. And so what we'll do is we're going to scroll down here and we'll say, let's imagine that this is a muscle fiber, which it is, but let's imagine it's from our quadriceps muscle, one of the big muscles in our thigh. And you can see here that it's already got some mitochondria, these green things here. Don't worry about the T-tubules, I-band, any of that things for the moment. We're just going to focus on the mitochondria. And so what happens is that we get, say we're doing endurance training, and you're performing over a long period of time, 3-kilometer runs, building up to 5 kilometers, etc. What happens in this muscle is we're going to get these mitochondria popping up in places, and you see we're getting this more mitochondria. So over time this build-up of mitochondria will allow the muscle to be actually able to perform longer, and therefore we get the endurance aspect. So we're able to produce more energy to keep us going. So as well as this increase in mitochondria, so we have an increase in mitochondria which has an overall impact, write this down, overall increase in capacity to produce energy. So we have this overall capacity to produce energy from this increase in mitochondria. Now what we also get is that we also get an increase in something called oxidative enzymes. So increase in oxidative enzymes. Now I don't want to go into too much detail because it can get complicated, but what you really need to know is that an increase in oxidative enzymes allows for more ATP to be produced, so allows for more ATP, our currency of biological energy, allows more ATP to be produced, and produced at a faster rate. So this means that when we have all these extra mitochondria, we can produce more ATP, and we can produce it quicker. And basically what these enzymes do, these oxidative enzymes, is they just speed this process up to allow us to produce it quicker. Now, there are other adaptations that our mitochondria undergo, such as an increased capacity to use lipids to produce energy, which is basically our fats. And this saves using our glycogen in other stores, but we're not going to go into this into detail in this video. But for the purposes of today, all you really need to understand is that the mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell, as they produce energy known as ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. And with endurance training, we get an increase in mitochondria, which will allow us to work longer or effectively have a greater endurance. The next aspect we're going to discuss in this video is capillaries, or more specifically something called capillary density. And it's alright if you don't know what this means, because I'll give you a quick brief explanation. And what capillary density refers to is the amount of capillaries that is supplying an area of muscle. So the more capillaries that are supplying an area of muscle, the more dense it is. So we say it has a greater capillary density. And if you're not sure what a capillary is, it's basically just a tiny blood vessel that supplies tissues throughout the body, such as organs, muscles, and bone, etc., etc. Now, what happens with endurance training is we get an increase in capillary density. And so what this really means is we just get more capillaries supplying the muscle, and it results in an increase in capillary density. Now, this increase in capillary density has a range of benefits, other benefits, and that we're going to discuss. One of them, which is important, is it slows blood flow down at the muscle and capillary junction. And what I mean basically by this is the areas where the capillaries allow for the exchange of nutrients and waste products between the capillary and the muscle. So what happens is the capillaries go right down to the muscle, and they give off their nutrients and accept the waste products from the muscle. And so with this increase in capillary density, the blood flow at this sort of junction area slows down to allow for a greater exchange of nutrients. So its result is a greater exchange between muscles and capillaries. And this exchange, as I said, can be nutrients and waste products, but one important nutrient that we will focus on, and you can already see the name of it down below, is a nutrient called oxygen. Now, most of you have probably heard of oxygen before, because you would know that's what's in the air when we breathe it in. So if you take a deep breath, you breathe in a lot of oxygen. But what this actually does is this oxygen will then diffuse into the bloodstream, or move into the bloodstream, and as the blood passes around the body, it ends up becoming into a capillary that supplies, we'll say, this muscle. The oxygen diffuses or moves from the capillary to the muscle. And it's important that this happens because oxygen is used by the mitochondria, so the powerhouse of the cell, to produce energy, which we already know is called ATP. So this oxygen is used by the mitochondria to produce ATP. But what we need something that can take the oxygen from the capillaries and keep it in the muscle, accept it. So what we have is this hemoprotein called myoglobin. And what this is, it's something called a hemoprotein, which you don't really need to know now, but you just need to know that it accepts and stores oxygen within the muscle. So this hemoprotein within muscle will pinch the oxygen molecules from the nearby capillaries. And what we see here is that with endurance training, we get an increase in myoglobin. So there's more myoglobin within our muscles. And I'll demonstrate this down here in the schematic I've drawn at the bottom here. So here's our capillary in this red box. Our oxygen is represented by the yellow circles within our capillary. So the oxygen we breathe in goes into this bloodstream system. We then have a muscle represented by a blue box, and a myoglobin within the muscle is represented by this sort of green area here. And so what normally happens is, without any endurance training or anything like that, some of this oxygen is naturally just going to diffuse or move across into the muscle, where it's accepted and stored by the myoglobin. But what happens with endurance training? We get an increase in the amount of this myoglobin. So we get more myoglobin molecules within our muscle. And what this then allows for is it allows for more oxygen to diffuse into our into our muscle and eventually to be used by the mitochondria. So this combination of the blood flow at the muscle capillary level slowing down, so a greater time for these oxygen molecules, nutrients, etc. to be exchanged, and the increase in the amount of myoglobin that can accept and store the oxygen will end up resulting in a net increase in ATP production by the mitochondria. And the results we see in the world is an increase in endurance. So you're able to perform, or muscles are able to perform for longer periods of time, and this is termed muscular endurance. As I conclude this video, I'd just like to make a note that this video was specific to endurance exercise adaptations, meaning that these adaptations would not necessarily be seen in short sprinting efforts or just high intensity efforts. That require a different set of adaptations, but feel free to look them up if you're interested in those. If you want to know more about this, look it up, look at some scholarly articles, the most recent literature, even a Google search, whatever you feel like. And if you want to ask me questions, feel free to comment them down in the comments section below, and thank you for listening.